Hello and welcome. This week, we will discuss Hume Section III of An Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding. This section is very short, and yet the three principles he discusses in this page reflect what he is going to use for his arguments in Section 4. So it's a good idea to have a strong grasp of these three connections among ideas. That way, when we move forward through Section 4, which is a two-parter, we'll have a solid understanding of what he's referring to. Now, Hume Section 3 will start with of the association of ideas and basically where this idea of compound and simple ideas came from. Then we will move on to the three principles of connection among ideas, namely resemblance, contiguity in time or place, and cause and effect. Then we will discuss Hume's conclusions. So with that, we will move on to the first slide of the association of ideas. Of the association of ideas. So Hume starts by stating, it is evident that there is a principle of connection between the different thoughts or ideas of the mind, and that in their appearance to the memory or imagination, they introduce each other with a certain degree of method and regularity. So what he's pointing out here is that it is his understanding as he reflects upon the way our ideas associate with one another, how we understand things, how ideas form in our mind, because of course we're talking about human understanding here at a fundamental level. He's saying the way ideas appear in the mind form a certain regularity, or they come to us with a certain form of regularity. And that from his understanding or from his reflection, ideas come to us in three distinct forms. The first is resemblance, the second is contiguity, and the third is cause and effect. And really what he's trying to focus on here is how our ideas form other ideas. He's not talking about how our ideas are created from sensory experience, because he already went over that in Section 2, in that all of our ideas are copies of impressions. What he's doing here is he's trying to discuss, or he's trying to point out, how our ideas form other ideas. How we rationalize, how we take a concept of red and then think about a red fire hydrant, and then think of the time I slipped on a red fire hydrant, and then think of the time my grandfather helped me out when I slipped on that red fire hydrant. It's an association among ideas, and that's what this Section 3 is going to focus on, of which there are only three, according to Hume. Now, this goes against common sense, because we often believe our mind has this infinite ability to come up with ideas or original ideas and things of that nature. And he states, even in our wildest and most wandering reveries, even in our dreams, we shall find that if we reflect, that the imagination ran not altogether at adventures, but that there was still a connection upheld among the different ideas which succeed each other. And what he's saying here is that even though common sense seems to dictate that we have this unbelievable imagination and this ability of the mind to come up with original ideas, the way that the ideas are presented to our mind comes in three distinct associations, or three distinct connections among ideas. And again, remember what he stated in Section 2, that all ideas are copies of impressions, and that when we believe we are coming up with an original idea, we are merely compounding what we have experienced. or compounding simple ideas, something he took from John Locke's essay of Human Understanding, Book 2. He brings this up again near the end of the first paragraph when he states a certain proof that the simple ideas comprehend and the compound ones were bound together by some universal principle which had an equal influence on all mankind. That he is basically restating his section 2 conclusion that all ideas are copies of impressions. And if you remember the pink elephant equation, the simple ideas form compound ones, and a simple idea is an idea that which cannot be broken up anymore. So even the idea of pink can be broken up into white and red, yet white can't be broken up anymore, nor red can be broken up anymore. So orange can be broken up because it's a combination of yellow and red, but red itself cannot be broken up. Therefore, red is a simple idea. And the combination of pink is a compound idea because it's a combination or a compound of the simple ideas. And of course, the pink elephant is a combination or a compound idea because it's the combination of many simple ideas. So that's what he means when he says simple and compound ideas, something he took from John Locke. But he believes this to be a universal principle. This applies to all mankind. Ideas are copies of impressions, and what we believe to be original ideas are just compound ideas from the simple. Nevertheless, ideas are copies of impressions, and the way ideas are formed or regulated within our minds comes from 3 distinct connections. These ideas associate themselves with these 3 connections. And with that, we're going to move on to the first connection and explain how those thoughts are presented to our minds. The first association of ideas, resemblance. Now, when he talks about resemblance, he states how a picture naturally leads our thoughts to the original. It can be thought of as triggering something previously experienced. And that's very important here because it has to be something that we previously experienced in order for it to be resemblance. And we pass from one idea to the next. So if you take this picture on the bottom right-hand corner of this kid playing with a fire truck, you could look at this picture and the fire truck itself could lead you to another idea where you see the fire truck and then you imagine a toy you had that resembles that fire truck. So now you have gone from one idea, the idea of that picture as it's been impressed on your mind, and it leads to another idea previously experienced, i.e. the playing with the fire truck or a fire truck like that when you were a little kid. Or it could even go to that fire truck resembles a certain hero you enjoyed when you were a kid. And so you pass from the idea of the fire truck to the idea of Optimus Prime. It's basically stating how one idea that is imprinted on your mind becomes another idea through the association of resemblance. Now, this happens to me when I see somebody who may look like my father. I immediately think of my father, and I might even think of a time where my father smiled in the same way that person was smiling, or when my father was wearing a shirt that resembled that shirt. It's resemblance when one idea passes to another idea that was previously experienced. And with that, we'll move on to the second principle of connection. The second association of ideas, contiguity. As Hume states, or gives an example, the mention of one apartment in a building naturally introduces an inquiry or discourse concerning the others. For example, when somebody talks about how noisy the people are upstairs and how they can hear it through their apartment, another person will talk about how it's noisy in their apartment as well. Or a person will talk about how the floors in their apartment is hardwood and therefore doesn't have any rugs, so the people underneath them must think they're loud as well. These thoughts are connected by a principle of contiguity because all the objects are geographically approximate to each other in a specific time and place. You know, when I see an international scout sitting in somebody's garage, I'll immediately remember working on a scout similar to that, which is resemblance, at my grandfather's house. But then I will go into the log fence that bordered us, the lychee tree in the background, the freshly cut grass. See, those things aren't resemblance. You know, because I didn't see grass, I didn't see the logs, I didn't see things that resembled that. What I did is I went from an idea, the international scout, to contiguity because I started imagining what other things were like at that particular point in time. The log fence, the lychee tree, the freshly cut grass, things of that nature. So the way our ideas form other ideas, in addition to resemblance, is contiguity. Because we can often think about things associated with a particular idea at that point in time. The color of the swimming pool water, whether it was nice and blue or was disgusting in green. The look of the chairs that bordered the pool, or the look of the carpet in your particular house forms a resemblance to the carpet when you were a kid, but then contiguity comes in and you remember where the TV was facing, where the dining room table was fixed. So you can see how contiguity is different than resemblance, because resemblance can lead us to things that resemble that particular idea, but contiguity, our experience at a particular point in time, can lead us to ideas that are associated with those experiences at that particular point in time. For me, the scout turns into the log fence, the lychee tree, the freshly cut grass, things of that nature, even down to the smell of the garage itself with the oil mixed with the gasoline. So that is the association of ideas, contiguity, and with that we're going to move on to the last association of ideas. The third association of ideas, cause and effect. As Hume states, cause and effect is when we observe an event and it leads to an inquiry as to the cause of the event. You know, he gives the example that when we think of a wound, we can scarcely forbear reflecting on the pain which followed it. And when you see a particular cut, you can reflect on the pain that would follow that particular cut, cause and effect. I like to think about Sherlock Holmes, and that's why I have the picture of the detective following the footprints. You know, Sherlock Holmes will look at a crime scene and he'll use his mind's ability to associate cause and effect to figure out where the perpetrator was standing, what was used, where he escaped. You know, he'll look at the footprints and he'll see how far the indentation goes down, therefore how much did the person weigh, approximately. If there's ashes on the side of the footprints, he can come to a idea of association on what kind of cigarette or cigar the perpetrator was using. You know, when we see an accident on the side of the road, I don't know about you folks, but this happens to me all the time. I'll look at the location of the smashes and, you know, where the cars are situated when I arrived. And my mind will naturally try to figure out, you know, who was at fault. because we got to blame somebody, right? So we'll look at, that person's smash is on the left-hand side. The person who's facing the flow of traffic smashes on the right-hand side. I bet you that other guy was trying to cut them off, and so went into traffic, causing the person who had the right-of-way to get smashed on the right-hand side, while the other person's driver's side left front fender was busted. You see, our minds have these natural ability of association from ideas or experiences to go into cause and effect. And cause and effect is very important later on in Section 4 because it's used as one of his big demolishing arguments on rationalism. But if we can understand how cause and effect is an association of ideas, that will go a long way. Because our ideas that are impressed upon us can naturally lead us to form new ideas from the relationship of cause and effect. And with that, we'll go into Hume's conclusions. Hume's conclusion to Section 3. So Hume states that, but that this enumeration is complete, and that there are no other principles of association except these, may be difficult to prove to the satisfaction of the reader. He admits that the people who are reading this may be skeptical that that is all the associations, that there are only these three associations of ideas. But then Hume states, but the more instances we examine and the more care we employ, the more assurance shall we acquire that the enumeration which we shall form from the whole is complete and entire. That the more instances we come up with, or the more ideas that we form by associating through other ideas, we shall prove more and more that there are only these three. That these three complete the entirety of the association of ideas. So Hume is admitting that there is no reason to state that these three and only these three principles of association are the entirety, but he cannot think of any others that would be needed at this fundamental level. And some people may try to give, counterexamples. For example, if you think about the association of idea of contrast, opposites. When I see a black bird and they immediately think about a white knight, and I say, that's an association of idea of contrast. That's not contiguity. That's not cause and effect. That's not resemblance. Hume would say, well, that's just a compound of associations. You're compounding the three associations of ideas. And this is how. My example of a black bird becoming a white knight is a compound association of resemblance and causation. The black is by cause and effect can become white, as I often witness the night become morning. So the idea of something that is black becoming something that is white comes from my association of cause and effect, because I often see things that are dark become light. And the white, from that resemblance, now that I have the idea of white, resembles that which is holy, and then the holy becomes the resemblance of a knight. So he shows that even though we believe we're coming up with original associations, as we believe we're coming up with original ideas, we are just compounding the simple, or in this case, we're compounding the three fundamental associations. And again, he challenges the reader. He's like, well, if this is incorrect, I challenge you to come up with an association of ideas that is not a compound of one of the three or all three fundamental principles of association that he has brought up. And with that, that ends Section 3. Now let's move on to Section 4. Now, this section is going to be divided up into 8 parts. The first part is going to go over or discuss Hume's fork something he is famous for when he divides all aspects of reason into relation of ideas and matters of fact. Then we're going to go into cause and effect and how cause and effect relates to reasoning. Then we're going to continue on and discuss how do we arrive at knowledge of cause and effect. Then we're going to go into part 2, the foundations of all conclusions of experience. Talk about the 2 kinds of reasoning that Hume discusses. Then we're going to go into induction and what the role induction plays in reasoning. And finally, we will conclude with Hume's skeptical argument that he built upon the entire time for Section 4. So far, Hume, in Section 1, we know he divided philosophy into 2 kinds. More importantly, however, in Section 1, Hume really mapped out his philosophical project, which started or was influenced by Newton's discovery, because before Sir Isaac Newton, people couldn't really explain the celestial movements of the planets, but Newton was able to explain at a fundamental level the motion or the laws of motion which is governed by gravity. So Hume figured if he can map out the way we understand, or the foundations of human understanding, then he can discover the limitations of human understanding, or probably more importantly, the limitations of reason. Because remember, Hume is an empiricist. He believes that all knowledge is only gained through the senses. He is very skeptical of rationalism, or mainly rationalism's ability to discover knowledge independent of experience. And this is what he brings to light in Section 1. And this is the focus of the rest of the inquiry. Now, in Section 2, he divides perceptions of the mind into ideas and impressions, but mainly he comes to the conclusion that every idea is a copy of an impression. Then in Section 3, he discusses the connections among ideas, or how ideas produce more ideas in our mind. And those 3 were resemblance, contiguity, and cause and effect. Now, for Section 4, he is going to focus on reasoning. Now, when I say reasoning, I mean our ability to come to conclusions based on arguments that we make. So when somebody makes an argument, they give you a set of examples called premises that form a conclusion. Why do you think your friend is in town today? Well, he gave me a call. I heard that he was going to go to the market earlier. And when he gave me a call, he asked me if I wanted anything from the farmer's market. And the farmer's market is only located in town, so he must be in town. So I would give you premises, or I would give you evidence that forms the conclusion that my friend is in town. And Hume wants to look at the way we reason. And this investigation into the way we reason produces some interesting conclusions on how weak or limited reason actually is. And with that, we will go into the first part discussing Hume's famous fork. Hume's fork. So Hume divides all objects of human reason or human inquiry into 2 kinds: relations of ideas and matters of fact. What he means by relations of ideas is geometry, algebra, arithmetic, every affirmation which is either intuitively or demonstratively certain. So obviously there's mathematical concepts where if I say 3 times 5 equals 30 divided by 2. This is demonstratively certain because I don't need to add anything else to these premises. I don't have to add anything more to the argument itself. It's a tautology. A tautology means that one side absolutely equals the other side. 3 times 5 absolutely equals 30 divided by 2. So, relations of ideas are certain in the way we reason. The way we reason is built so that the argument that we present is certain by the statement itself. As he says, the relations of ideas are a priori. They create this indestructible bond between the ideas. 3 times 5 equals 30 divided by 2. This is an indestructible bond. Both sides equal 15. No matter what you do, this argument itself is indestructible as both sides are equal to each other. Now, a priori, this means before experience. So anytime you see a priori, it means that which is known before experience, before we've had any sensible impression placed upon us. It can be known simply by logical assessment or logical reason. If it can be known purely by logical reason or the way we assess things with our mind, then it is a priori. It exists independent of experience. To contrast that is the term a posteriori. That means after experience, or that which is only known after experience. All right, so now that we have those two terms, not all relations of ideas are mathematical in nature. For example, if I say all bachelors are unmarried men and Jim is a bachelor, then Jim is an unmarried man. That is a relation of ideas. Because the way it argues, the way it is put forth, creates this indestructible bond between definitions. All bachelors are unmarried. Number 1. Number 2, Jim is a bachelor. Then the conclusion, therefore, Jim is an unmarried man. We can come to the conclusion that Jim is an unmarried man and by definition, a bachelor. So the relation of ideas is that which creates this indestructible bond between reasoning. And there's something else that is very distinct for relations of ideas. If I negate the conclusion, it creates a contradiction within the premise. And let me explain this. Say, for example, I give the 3 times 5 equals 30 divided by 2 in a specific argument. I say 3 times 5 equals 15. All that which equals 15 will equal 3 times 5. 30 divided by 2 equals 15. Therefore, 30 divided by 2 equals 3 times 5. If I negate that 30 divided by 2 equals 3 times 5. What I'm saying here is 30 divided by 2 does not equal 3 times 5. Now that creates a contradiction because 3 times 5 equals 15 and 30 divided by 2 equals 15, therefore they equal each other. So if I say that 30 divided by 2 doesn't equal 3 times 5, I'm saying that it doesn't equal 15 and it equals 15 all at the same time. That's a contradiction. All relations of ideas will create a contradiction if I negate the conclusion. Now, when I say it'll create a contradiction, I mean it'll create a contradiction somewhere in the argument itself. If I say 30 divided by 2 does not equal 3 times 5, I have to go back into the argument itself and fix something, because the way the argument forms, I have to somehow prove that 30 divided by 2 doesn't equal 15. So if I negate the conclusion that 30 divided by 2 doesn't equal 3 times 5, it creates a contradiction within the argument itself because of the indestructible bond that is created within the argument. Same thing with the bachelor and Jim being an unmarried man. All bachelors are unmarried men. Jim is an unmarried man, therefore Jim is a bachelor. If I say Jim isn't a bachelor, then Jim is not an unmarried man. Oh, but see, Jim is an unmarried man for him to be a bachelor by definition. So now I've created this contradiction. Reductio ad absurdum. It's reduced to absurdity. If I say all bachelors are unmarried men and Jim is an unmarried man, Jim is therefore a bachelor by definition. That's that indestructible bond that relations of ideas create. It's a way of deductively reasoning through an argument from certain premises to a certain conclusion. So much so that if I negate the conclusion, Jim is not a bachelor, I must negate something in the premises, or it's going to create a contradiction. I either have to say that Jim is a woman instead of a man because bachelors are all men, or I have to say Jim is in fact married, because if he's a man and he is unmarried, he is by definition a bachelor. All right, so those are relations of ideas. Now we will discuss matters of fact. He says every matter of fact is still possible because it can never imply a contradiction. And you see, every other aspect of reasoning that doesn't fall within relations of ideas are considered matters of fact. When I say the sun will not rise tomorrow, that does not imply a contradiction. While many will say, well, the sun is going to rise tomorrow, Hume is specifically saying, how do you know? I mean, it's not certain, definitely not demonstratively certain at this point in time, and its negation does not create a contradiction. The sun will not rise tomorrow is no less intelligible a proposition and implies no more contradiction than the affirmation that it will rise tomorrow. Yeah, you may have more evidence for the fact that it will rise tomorrow, but the fact is that it doesn't create a contradiction. All matters of fact have the semblance of possibility because it is in fact possible that the sun will not rise tomorrow. We could have a catastrophic set of events that make it so that the sun does not rise tomorrow in your particular hemisphere, or the earth itself blowing up, whatever it may be. The fact is that matters of fact all rely on some semblance of possibility and thus can never imply a contradiction. That the sun is shining, that yesterday I went for a walk, or that it will rain tomorrow are all matters of fact. And they are all learned a posteriori. And they can be denied without fear of contradiction. Now, again, a posteriori is that which is known after experience. I only know the sun is shining if I experience the sun shining. I only know that yesterday I went for a walk if in fact I experienced the action of going for a walk. I only know that it is raining right now if it is in fact raining, and I only can postulate that it may rain tomorrow from the experience that when the clouds make this formation, or when the weatherman says this, although I never rely on the weatherman, I know by experience that these certain elements come together to produce rain. This is where the brilliance of Hume really comes forward, because he states that, we can only know matters of fact a posteriori. If I'm going to argue or assert that it is raining or that it's sunny outside, there is nothing in the argument of sunny or rainy that will prove that it is sunny or rainy outside. With the other relation of ideas, it is contained within the argument itself. The conclusion is contained within the argument itself. It can be known a priori because I can tell this to somebody, and using the premises to the conclusion, the same person can affirm the same conclusion. Oh, Jim, man, he's still a bachelor. Oh, yeah, Jim's a bachelor? That means he hasn't gotten married yet. See, the conversation that we're having can easily be had because the evidence for Jim being a bachelor is contained within the definitions itself. For matters of fact, however, if I say it's sunny outside and therefore it's not raining, there is nothing within that argument that can be known a priori. There is no way to logically prove that argument without having to experience it. If I tell someone it's sunny outside, therefore it's not raining, we cannot prove that by the argument I just gave. There's nothing within the definition of sunny or rainy that proves it right now. There's no indestructible bond that is created between sunny and raining that links it to proving it right now, other than me going out and proving it with my sight, proving it with my experience. Therefore, it is only proven a posteriori. So for Hume, he says, we should therefore in vain attempt to demonstrate its falsehood. For if it were demonstratively false, it would imply a contradiction. What Hume is saying here is that when you make a statement like that which is a matters of fact type of statement, there is nothing within the argument itself that creates this indestructible bond of certainty that can prove the argument without experience. So that's what the vain attempt is that he's discussing. He's saying that those who believe they can argue or affirm things without experience, a priori, are attempting matters of fact in vain. Because if it were demonstratively false, it would imply a contradiction. But there is nothing within the argument of it is sunny outside, therefore it's not raining, that can be proven a priori. So it is completely in vain if you're going to sit here and try to argue without experience. And now we're really getting to the subserviency now, aren't we? It's like, whoa, wait a minute here. In the beginning, he talked about the subservience the abstruse philosophy has to experience. And now he's demonstrating that it's completely in vain for you to feel that you can argue these facts a priori, because there is nothing contained in the argument that links things together that is not known without experience. There is nothing in the statement, it's sunny outside, therefore it's not raining, that can be proven without experience. So those who try to prove things without the use of experience are attempting things in vain. So for this first part, Hume is doing nothing more than separating the way we reason, the way we think. The first type contains all the information inside of the argument itself. All the information of what a bachelor is and how it equals an unmarried man is contained within the argument, so that if Jim fulfills the requirement set forth of being a man and being unmarried, he can therefore be considered a bachelor. So the premises, the statements that I give you all the information you need to come to the conclusion. Everything else relies on experience, according to Hume, and has a semblance of possibility. The sun will not rise tomorrow has a semblance of possibility. But now he's going to focus on, what evidence do we have of matters of fact beyond present testimony? So he understands that there are matters of fact that can be proven right now by going out and looking outside, but he's not going to focus on those because honestly, philosophy doesn't really focus much on those. The way Descartes reasoned and the way Descartes argued went way beyond present testimony. So that is what Hume is going to discuss here. What evidence do we have of the matters of fact beyond present testimony or records of our memory? And with that, we're going to move on to the next slide. Cause and effect. This is the second time that Hume has mentioned cause and effect. The first was one of the three association of ideas, where he talked about cause and effect and how one idea under the guidance of cause and effect can turn into another idea. But here, he realizes something. All reasoning concerning matters of fact seem to be founded on the relation of cause and effect. Now, he's not talking about the relation of ideas. No, he's talking about the matters of fact. And Hume gives us an example. He says, ask a man why he believes that his friend is in France. Because Hume suggests that we know matters of fact about unobservable things, like he can't observe that his friend is in France right here, right this minute. So the matters of fact about unobservable things are known through a process of cause and effect. My knowledge that my friend is in France might have been caused by a letter or postcard from that friend where the return address is France. Or maybe he gave a phone call and he was at a local pub or something to that nature. And even my knowledge that the sun will rise tomorrow is inferred from past experience, which tells me that the sun has risen every day in the past. So by this chain of cause and effect, I believe the sun will rise tomorrow because it's always happened in the past. So matters of fact consistently suppose a connection between the present fact and that which it is inferred from. The present fact is my friend is in France. And the chain of cause and effect to which it is inferred from is the phone call, the letter, the photos, anything of that nature. And the same thing goes for the statement that the sun will rise tomorrow. The present fact is the sun will rise tomorrow. That's what I'm arguing. And it is inferred from a causal chain of that which has already happened. Every day since I've been born, the sun rises in the morning. And so I believe through a causal chain of events, the way the earth revolves around the sun, that the sun is going to rise every morning. If there were no bond, no causal chain of events, the inference would be entirely precarious, according to Hume. Basically, it wouldn't make sense if there were no causal bond. And the billiard player that he is, and many philosophers are, he gives an example with a cue ball hitting an 8-ball. Now, you have one cue ball that hits an 8-ball, sends the 8-ball towards the pocket. If no bond occurred between the hit and the motion, it would be precarious to explain how the 8-ball moved. We naturally see a cause, the cue ball's movement, and then the effect, the 8-ball's movement. If there were no bond between the two, then it wouldn't make sense. The cause and effect wouldn't make sense, and even more so, life wouldn't make sense to us. But then Hume asks, how do we know the principle of cause and effect? How is it we understand the principle of cause and effect? And he's building on something here. In the beginning, he divided all matters of reason, the way we inquire, human understanding at its fundamental source, into two parts. The first one is relations of ideas, the mathematical principles and the arguments that are indestructibly bound together so that you don't need anything more but the argument itself to deduce the conclusion. And then now we have matters of fact, everything that is not a relation of ideas. And this concerns philosophy. Philosophy that doesn't deal with deductive certainty, that's for sure. Definitely the philosophy that Descartes was using. And he says, wow, this philosophy relies heavily on cause and effect. Because in order for something to be possible, when we sit here and argue about something that isn't unobservable at this particular point in time, when we reason about a future event, it relies heavily on cause and effect. And there's not one example we can give that doesn't. There's an aspect of cause and effect in these inferences that we make towards unobservable things or future events. So then now Hume focuses on the foundation of cause and effect itself. If I see one billiard ball rolling towards another, how do I know that the second billiard ball will move when it is struck? He suggests that this knowledge cannot be a priori, cannot be known before experience. Since I can deny that the second ball will move without contradiction. Remember, that which is known a priori before experience, and known for certain, a priori, without experience, falls into the relations of ideas. It falls into that aspect where the definition needs to exist somewhere in the argument. And that doesn't work for the billiard ball hitting another billiard ball, because there is nothing contained in the motion of the first cue ball, or the cue ball itself. There's nothing inherent in the argument that a cue ball is rolling towards another ball that deductively proves, or whose definition is contained in the 8-ball moving. It may not be an 8-ball. It may not be a ball at all. I've played pool where I've hit the ball so light that it is moving towards the ball and the other ball doesn't move. I didn't put enough English, or for whatever reason. But if you notice here, we know it's not a relation of ideas because it's not certainly known, and the definition of one billiard ball rolling isn't contained in the second billiard ball moving. We know to negate the conclusion that the 8-ball moved does not create a contradiction with the cue ball moving. So the idea that the cue ball moved and the 8-ball moved is not known a priori. And that's what he's saying right here. We cannot know this inference before experience. We cannot know this inference by reason alone. Because if we knew it by reason alone, then it would create a contradiction. And the premise of the cue ball moving would have to be inherently bonded to the 8-ball moving, that indestructible bond, and we know it's not there. This is also what he means when he says cause and effect are themselves totally distinct. That nothing in the movement of the first billiard ball can a priori suggest to me the movement of the second billiard ball. And right now he is just focusing on a priori argumentation, the way philosophers use rationalism to come to conclusions or inferences about future events. Well, they can't do that without an idea of cause and effect. And guess what? You cannot use cause and effect a priori because there is nothing inherently defined in the white ball moving that suggests the black ball will move. Hume therefore concludes that all of our knowledge of cause and effect must be based on experience from observed phenomena in the past that we infer as yet unobservable phenomena in the future. I believe the 8 ball is going to be moved when it's struck by the cue ball because I've seen it done 1,000 times in the past. If the cue ball hits the 8 ball and the 8 ball does this left-handed spin English that does a U-turn, well then, that's a whole nother effect to the cause. But what he's saying here is these two are distinct in our ability to argue that one is connected to another. Their bonds are distinct because their bonds aren't demonstratively certain. The definition of the cue ball's movement is not bonded to the 8 ball's movement. And to negate the fact that the 8 ball moved, like the 8 ball did not move, does not create a contradiction of the cue ball moving. So the 3 factors that are related to relations of ideas are not found in inferences about the future. And that's all he's saying to this point. And we need to kind of understand here how he has come to this conclusion, separated the two. Relations of ideas and matters of fact. These are criteria or elements to relations of ideas. These are criteria or element to matters of fact. Matters of fact all rely on cause and effect, and there doesn't seem to be any argument to the contrary at this point. In order to understand or deduce future events, it relies on cause and effect, and cause and effect cannot be known a priori. Cause and effect cannot be known by pure reason. And he's going to go much further and deeper into this, but at this particular point in time, it's good to know that reason alone cannot argue cause and effect. As soon as you start using cause and effect, you are relying on experience. And with that, we'll move on to the next slide. How do we arrive at knowledge of cause and effect? So now Hume throws down the gauntlet. Cause and effect. Knowledge of this relation of cause and effect is not in any instance attained by reason a priori, but arises entirely from experience. This is what philosophers do. They start with evidence, arguing specific kinds of evidence, and then they take that evidence to its limits. When they find something new, and then they show or deduce or prove that that statement is true or fact, then they move from that statement into another statement that is bound to it, all the way to conclusions. It's like laying a foundation of a pyramid. You're not going to get to the top of the pyramid without laying the foundations of the bottom. So this is how philosophy works, and this is how reasoning for philosophers work. So he's already shown that cause and effect relies on experience. And now he's stating even further that any knowledge of this relation cannot be attained by reason, and arises entirely from experience. And now he gives some examples of Adam and Eve, because even if you don't believe in the Bible, or you do believe in the Bible, there's the story of Adam and Eve. They are born into this world full of new experiences, but they have no knowledge of it yet. Imagine Adam, born into this world, has no experience or past experience to cling to. How would Adam, through rational faculty, infer that he would not be able to breathe underwater? Now think about that. Adam is brand new. He's never seen water before. He's brought into this world with new things, no experience to cling to. How would he rationally conclude that he could not breathe in this fluid, transparent-like material? And even further, that it would suffocate him if he stayed under there too long. There would be no way, because there is nothing inherent in this fluid that denotes unable to breathe. There is nothing in transparency that denotes cannot breathe. Reason cannot draw any inference concerning real existence and matter of fact without the assistance from experience. I am not going to be able to conclude that that water will suffocate me unless I have experienced the suffocation through doesn't have to be me, could be a friend, but the fact is it's not known simply through reason or purely through reason, which is a priori. And Hume beseeches us, find a way for matters of fact to be learned without the need of experience. How are you supposed to deduce that gunpowder would explode when a spark is introduced without experience? I mean, even science relies on experience here. I know some of you would think, oh, well, there's chemical faculties that are inherent in gunpowder. When it's introduced to a flame, it explodes. Yes, I agree. There are these chemicals or elements that exist inside gunpowder that would make it explode if a spark is introduced. But the way science was able to figure that out was through experimentation. And what is experimentation other than experience over and over again? I mean, Hume is one of the reasons why science can't come out with certainty, that they can only say, okay, these laws are here because they seem to govern more often than not. We've done so many tests and have positive results more often than not, so now it's a law. Not certainty, but more often than not. So that's why the hypotheses work, that's why it can be set into a law. But for Hume, were any objects presented to us and were required to pronounce concerning the effect that will result from it without consulting part observations, you would have no idea. What that means is, if an object was presented to you that you have no prior knowledge of, that object could do anything, and you have no idea what it would do. The mind can never possibly find the effect in a supposed cause by the most accurate scrutiny and examination, for the effect is different than the cause and consequently can never be discovered in it. An apple falls from the tree and it goes straight to the ground. Why does it go down rather than up? Why does it go down rather than left, rather than right? Well, we say gravity. But what is gravity? The motion of pulling something towards the earth. Now we know because the earth is big, and so smaller objects are going to be pulled through this force of gravity. If the apple fell and suspended in midair, we would come up with other reasons of why it's suspended in midair. Maybe gravity ceased to exist at that particular point in time. But you see what's happening here? All of our understandings concerning cause and effect seem to rely on nothing more than experience. When one billiard ball is struck into a second, why is it not possible for the second to explode or leap off the table or spin or go in any other direction? All of these suppositions are consistent and conceivable. Why do we give preference to just one? All of our reason a priori will never be able to show us any foundation for this preference. Because if you think about it, we're preferring that they will scatter in a particular sort of way because we have seen them collide in the same way countless times without any instance to the contrary. But just because it has always happened in the past does not mean it will always happen in the future. I'll give you an example. I have played pool my entire life, and I'm a fairly larger individual, so when I break with consistent force. Now, just last year, for the first time ever, I shattered or split in half the lead ball, and I've never done that before. I always thought, marble, I can hit it hard. It's not going to crack. I've seen professionals who hit it way harder than I do, and it didn't crack, or it doesn't crack. So I give preference to the billiard balls staying in one piece and scattering around the board so that I have a clear shot and can start running the table. And yet, here's an instance when something completely different happened. Can you imagine the first person that put a backward spin on the cue ball? How would they have expected that if they hit the ball with this downward spin that it would back English or draw back on the table? Experience teaches us these things. We inherently join causes and effects. We believe there's this indestructible bond between cause and effect, that if I hit it at the right speed, the same speed, into this ball at the same angle, it will go the same way. But according to Hume, every effect is distinct even from its cause, because the effects therefore could not be discovered in the cause, and thus a priori conception of it is completely arbitrary, because you're not going to be able to argue that the one billiard ball is going to cause the other billiard ball to move in this particular sort of way. Think about this, and as an example Hume gives as well. There is nothing inherent or defined within wheat bread that denotes satiation. There is nothing within the composition of bread that denotes this satisfaction upon consumption. It is only known through experience of us have eaten it, and therefore satisfies us. There are times where I will eat the same bread, the same amount of bread, and I will not have the same satiation. I will not have the same satisfaction. I will not be full. And while we can make many reasons or excuses on why I would not be full for the same amount of bread, the fact still remains that abstract reasoning in the world can never lead us one step towards knowledge of it. When we reason a priori and consider merely an object or cause, it could never suggest to us the notion of any distinct object such as its effect, much less show an inseparable connection between them. Hume states that reason alone will not conclude that fire will burn without experience, or conclude that clear materials will hinder my breath, i.e. water, or that a billiard ball being struck a certain way will make it roll backwards. That is why Hume concludes that every effect is distinct from its cause, because there is no logical connection between the two. Logical connection that can be known without experience. And he ends part one by saying a man must be very sagacious who could discover by reasoning that crystal is the effect of heat, or that ice is made from cold, without previously being acquainted with the operations that govern these qualities. One of my favorite examples was the black crow. If I'm sitting in my room and my door is open and a black crow flies by, and then another black crow flies by, and another black crow flies by, I may start indulging in the argument that another black crow is going to fly by, or even that all crows are black, since I've never seen a white one, or a yellow one, or a red one. But why am I giving such a preference to the fact that I've only seen it been done this way? And really, that's all cause and effect inferences are made on, just because it's always been done this way. When we see something new, now we add something new to the mix. But that's extremely folly if you think about it, especially when it comes to philosophical type of reasoning that wants to deal with certainty. I mean, especially Cartesian certainty, right, with Descartes. To rely on this uniformity that the past will always resemble the future is a big leap of faith. Because, one, we don't control nature. And in part two, he'll really go deeper into that, and I'm not going to skip ahead there. But as long as you understand what he's saying when he says that, one, all matters of fact rely on cause and effect, and two, cause and effect cannot be known a priori. Therefore, all matters of fact rely on cause and effect, which is only known through experience. So these rationalists who believe that they can come to conclusions independent of experience can't even use human understanding without appealing to experience. And with that, we'll move on to part two, where he discusses the conclusions we make through experience and further hone in his claim that rationalism cannot conclude anything independent of experience unless it sticks with the relations of ideas. Part two. The foundations of all conclusions from experience. So Hume has already demonstrated that at its foundation, one cannot use reasons concerning matters of fact without appealing to experience. Now, he's going to take that a step further and say, even after we've experienced things, the conclusions we render still are not done through reason. And that is a big claim. In his own words, he says, even after we have experience of the operations of cause and effect, our conclusions from that experience are not founded on reasoning or any process of understanding. So that is what this next section is going to be dedicated to, showing that even after we have experienced cause and effect, future induction is not going to rely on reason, but is still going to rely on experience. He starts with, nature has kept us at a great distance from all of her secrets and has afforded us only the knowledge of a few superficial qualities. Hume is specifically referring to causation here because he believes we only have one event and then another event. That nature keeps the causation that links the two a secret. When we think about what we experience, when the billiard ball is struck, when we start to drown, or when we're burnt by fire, we never actually experience the causation, the linking principle between two events. We only experience the two events. I only experience one billiard ball, then the other one moves. I only experience jumping in the water, then I cannot breathe. I only experience the fire, and then when I get close to it, it burns. As Hume says, nature conceals from us those powers and principles on which the influence of those objects entirely depends. For example, our senses inform us of the color, weight, and consistency of bread, but neither sense nor reason can inform us of those qualities which fit it for nourishment and support the human body. Sight or feeling conveys an idea of an actual motion of bodies, but as to the wonderful force or power which would carry on moving bodies forever to a continued change of pace, and which bodies never lose but only communicating it to others, of this we cannot form the most distinct conception. And what he's saying here is that we only experience one event to another, and our brains form the conclusion. When something else happens, then we make that link. When something new happens, then we create another link. But the link itself is never experienced. That special causation, that power that links the two, we never experience it, nor can reason discover it. We only experience a constant conjunction of events, the joining of two events. And based on that constant conjunction, we assume that the same thing will happen the next time. We infer that other objects, which are in appearance similar, will be attended with similar effects. But if you insist that the inference is made by a chain of reasoning, I desire you to produce that reasoning. So first he's going after reason, and then he'll talk about experience, but the constant conjunction of events, if you insist that an inference is made by a chain of reason, he desires you to produce that reasoning. What type of reasoning can you come to the table with that is strong enough to discover this causal chain? The connections between the propositions, the cause and effect, is not intuitive. It's not just known before experience. It's almost as if you need a median between the two events in order for reason to be able to link them together. You know, when I use reason to figure out a mathematical formula, I have linking mathematical propositions that allow me to go from 3 plus 2 equals 5. There are linking propositions. For me to have that same rational conception of cause and effect, there needs to be a median. There needs to be a link. And Hume is like, okay, so what is that median? These two propositions are distinct, according to Hume, and that the constant conjunction of the two is what allows us to form conclusions based on what may happen. But if reason is to infer future propositions, future causes, it must be able to link the two propositions and the medium a priori, or without experience. So a person who believes that they can understand or infer future events, they need to come to the table with a medium that can be known a priori or without experience. This is when Hume sets his sights to discover, in vain, actually, which kind of reasoning can discover this medium, and therefore prove that human reasoning cannot discover this medium. He's going to talk about reasoning now, And he's going to show that reasoning cannot produce nor discover this medium. So Hume argues that in order for reasoning to be able to produce conclusions based off future events, it must be able to discover a medium between events. It doesn't seem like a medium exists because all events are separate. It's only our mind and experience that form constant conjunctions. So much so that when we meet a new event, that's no problem. We'll just add that to the list of effects for the particular cause that I thought was the same. But for reason to be able to come to conclusions, they need to find a medium that is independent of experience, something that they can intuitively discover. Just like the mathematical principles and the relations of ideas, it needs to exist somewhere in the argument for them to go from one statement to another in order to form a conclusion. And the conclusion needs to be independent of experience because, that's what the rationalists said in the first place, that they would be able to deduce without experience. Distrust the senses. The senses can be fooled. Only the mind can lead to truth. Therefore, when the mind is unfettered by the body, it discovers truth. Well, if you believe reason can discover truth unfettered by the body, this is your criteria. You need to be able to discover the medium that links a cause to an effect. He doesn't believe it can happen because events are distinct. What causally conjoins them is the constant conjunction that we've experienced through our lifetime and the way our minds remember that causal conjunction. So it is not reason that allows us to remember or come to these conclusions. So right now he's going to talk about reasoning to negatively prove that it can't find the medium. But nevertheless, let's go on the journey with Hume as he separates two kinds of reasoning. The two kinds of reasoning. Now, I'm not going to spend too long on this because, like I said, he's really doing this as a negative experiment just to show what type of reasoning matters of fact would be concerned with. But nevertheless, we're on the journey. So he states that all reasoning is either demonstrative or moral. The demonstrative reasoning is the reasoning that he's actually already brought up already. It's concerned with relations of ideas, and it's contained within the argument itself so that it can be demonstrated there. This type of reasoning is concerned with that which is deductively valid. Deductively is the way the argument is created. For example, all unmarried men are bachelors. Jim is a bachelor, and therefore Jim is an unmarried man. This is deductively valid because the definitions are contained within the argument itself. What's an unmarried man? An unmarried man is a bachelor. Is Jim a bachelor? Well, if Jim satisfies the criteria that was previously stated, unmarried and man, then yes, he is in fact a bachelor. Demonstrative reasoning has conclusions which are negated, results in contradictions, just like the relations of ideas. Because it cannot be deductively valid or demonstratively reasoned if the premises are not conjoined with this inseparable bond towards the conclusion. The premises contain the definitions of which the conclusion relies upon. And that's what's the difference between the other reasoning, because there was nothing in the definition of wheat bread that denotes nourishment. Continuing the discussion on demonstrative reason, there is no demonstrative reasoning in the case that seems evident. Is there any more intelligible proposition than to affirm that all trees will flourish in December and January and decay in May and June? See, what he's saying here is, is it any more intelligible to say that the trees are not going to die in December, that they'll die in June instead? As we know, he's pointing out the winter season when trees usually do, in fact, die, and the fact that they may die in June and May instead. Now, whatever is intelligible and can be distinctly conceived implies no contradiction and can never be proved false by any demonstrative argument or abstract reasoning a priori. He's saying that for it to be intelligible, if it's to be known by reason alone, that it has to be demonstratively certain. Just because every crow that I have encountered up till now has been black does not mean the next one will be. Just because every piece of bread I've encountered has nourished me does not mean the next one will. I cannot conclude that all crows are black, nor can I conclude that the next crow I will see will be black. So now he goes into moral reasoning, those concerned with nature. Again, when he says moral, he means concerned with nature, not ethical. So the moral reasoning is concerned with the matters of fact and existence. All arguments concerning existence are founded on the relation of cause and effect. Our knowledge of that relation is derived entirely from experience. As he stated before, we know that everything concerning matters of fact relies on cause and effect, and cause and effect relies on experience, because we only understand cause and effect from the constant conjunction of similar events. So then Hume concludes that our ability to come to conclusions based on matters of fact do not rely on deduction. They rely on induction. Deduction is when a set of premises lead to a conclusion, and that conclusion is contained within the premises itself. Induction, however, takes an argument and a description of some sample and extends that description outside of the sample. It extends the definition beyond the argument, beyond the premises. When I say the sun will rise tomorrow, there is nothing inherent in my argument. I don't produce any premise or sample that comes to the conclusion that's based inherently on that sample. When I say the sun will rise tomorrow, I'm saying it has always happened in the past. When I wake up in the morning, the sun is rising. The way I believe the earth rotates and the way I believe the sun is positioned denotes that the sun will probably continue on this path and rise tomorrow. Therefore, the sun will rise tomorrow. But there's nothing in the argument that denotes that the sun will in fact rise tomorrow. Because anything can happen. Anything can happen. And the sun may not, in fact, rise tomorrow. So that's what induction is. When you use induction, you are going beyond what the premises you give can conclude, as far as meaning and logical deduction, or in contrast to logical deduction. And I hope we understand the difference between that two. Deduction, all married men are bachelors. Jim is an unmarried man, therefore Jim is a bachelor. The argument's premises hold the definition for the conclusion. The negation of the conclusion creates a contradiction within the premise. There is nothing inherent in the conclusion, the sun will rise tomorrow, that is located within the definitions of the premise. It can't be found there. Just because it's always happened in the past does not define that the sun will rise tomorrow. So that's the difference between induction and deduction. And Hume concludes that we must concern ourselves then with induction, because the arguments concerning matters of fact do not rely on deduction. So the next slide is going to go over induction and how we use induction in our lives. Because remember what he's doing here. He's trying to demonstrate that even after we experience cause and effect, when we formulate conclusions about what's going to happen further, we still don't use reason. So now he's going to use induction, and he's going to work to show that induction cannot solely rely on reason. Induction. So now Hume focuses on induction, and he states, from cause which appears similar, we expect similar effects. We infer a connection between sensible qualities and secret powers. But on what process of argument is this inference founded? Where is this medium? The interposing ideas which join propositions so very wide of each other. How do we connect the water as being that which will suffocate me? How do we conjoin bread and all of its material compositions with the fact of nourishing my hunger? He believes these are very wide concepts logically, because if you examine bread, if you examine the materials that signify bread, you're not going to find nourishment. But more importantly, this directs Hume's inquiry into the connections, into the argument of connectivity. But it starts with him giving examples. He says, color, consistence, and other sensible qualities of bread appear not of themselves to have any connection with the secret power of nourishment and support. For if it were there, we would be able to infer those secrets without the aid of experience. So now it's like he's putting it right back on rationalism, and he's identifying that the weaknesses rationalists have actually prove that there is no secret power. Because if there was a secret power, that we could infer, that could be argued from the color, consistence, or other sensible qualities of bread into nourishment, then we wouldn't need experience. Rationalism can't do that. So now he's going to see, well, how does rationalism come to these conclusions without this medium? Hume says on the bottom of page 22, if we be, therefore, engaged by argument to put trust in past experience and make it the standard of our future judgment, these arguments must be probable only, or such as regard matters of fact and real existence according to the division of the above mentioned. But that there is no argument of this kind must appear if our explication of that species of reasoning be admitted as solid and satisfactory. What he's saying here is, if you are going to use induction to come to conclusions about future events, those events will only be probable. They will not be guaranteed. Hume goes on to state that all arguments concerning existence are founded on relations of cause and effect, that our knowledge of that relation is derived entirely from experience, and that all of our experimental conclusions proceed upon the superstition that the future will be conformable to the past. That is what is called the uniformity principle. And again, I'll state this again. The uniformity principle is the belief and superstition that the future will always conform to the past. This becomes the secret premise that people use to argue or to use induction to future events. They all have this hidden agenda, this hidden uniformity principle that the future will resemble the past. So Hume states, it's possible that their secret nature and consistently all their effects and influences may change without any change in their sensible qualities. How can you believe this uniformity principle wholeheartedly? We have no access to the secret nature, and consequently, the effects that influence can change. Nature can change without the sensible qualities changing. The billiard ball can remain the same, the cue ball can remain the same, but then the effect experience something completely different. It explodes, it cracks in half. Something different happens, but yet everything from the sensible qualities remain the same. So how can you use the uniformity principle? Observations of the past do not guarantee uniformity of the future. So what logic, what process of argument secures you against this superstition? What argument can you make that guarantees the uniformity principle? And there he concludes that all of our experimental conclusions proceed upon the superstition that the future will be conformable to the past. All of our experimental conclusions regarding matters of fact all have the hidden premise of the uniformity principle. But we have no guarantee against the uniformity principle changing. The sensible qualities can remain the same. We see the same thing, we sense the same thing, but something entirely different happens. I grab the same piece of bread, it's the same consistency, it's the same old day-old bread, I eat it and I'm not nourished. What guarantee do we have of this uniformity principle? And this leads to Hume's skeptical argument. Because the uniformity principle, in order for a person to logically argue that the future will resemble the past, they need to prove that the uniformity principle is rationally justified, that we can justify the uniformity principle, because that's what they rely upon. They rely upon the superstition that the future will always conform to the past. When I state that the sun will rise tomorrow, I say every morning since I've been alive, the sun has always risen, so it's going to rise tomorrow. There's a hidden premise with the uniformity principle that states the future will always conform to the past, therefore the sun will rise tomorrow. And with that, we'll move on to the skeptical argument. The conclusion to Section 4 and Hume's skeptical argument. So, from the beginning, he states, all matters of fact rely on a posteriori knowledge of cause and effect. A posteriori, of course, means after experience, and Hume has demonstrated this to a substantial degree. When we rely on matters of fact, when we use induction to future conclusions, we are relying or basing that knowledge on cause and effect. And cause and effect is only known through experience. I only understand cause and effect a posteriori. I only understand cause and effect because I've experienced it. When a rationalist starts arguing or using induction to future possibilities, all of the arguments or all of the premises have an underlying hint of cause and effect. Because if not, it would just be the relations of ideas, the mathematical principles where everything exists within the premise, or the definitions exist within the premises itself. So if philosophy is going to try to just use rationalism, it's going to do so in vain, because it does have a subservience to experience. Because all matters of fact rely on cause and effect. And cause and effect is only known through experience. So number 2, for reason to form conclusions based on cause and effect, we use induction. And 3, if induction is to be a valid form of reasoning, we must prove a principle of uniformity. If induction is going to be rationally justified, we need to prove that the future will always resemble the past. It cannot be just superstition. They need to argue that the principle of uniformity is valid. And some will say, well, the principle of uniformity is valid because the future does resemble the past. Similar effects will produce similar causes. But that's why Hume states right here in number 4, any reasoning regarding cause and effect is based on mere conjecture and custom from past experience, with the hidden assumption that the past will undoubtedly resemble the future. When you try to argue for the uniformity principle, the argument becomes circular. The uniformity principle states the future will always resemble the past. Okay? The future will always resemble the past. Prove it. Well, the future always resembles the past because, it always has. The future has always resembled the past. If you're going to argue uniformity principle, you're trying to argue that the future will resemble the past, but then you're going to use the fact that it has so far as the premise to the certainty of the uniformity principle, so you can see its circularity. Uniformity exists because the future resembles the past. How do you know that? Well, because I've seen the future resemble the past in the same way since I can remember. There's no other way to make this argument. And it's illogical because it's circular. You cannot prove the uniformity principle by appealing to the uniformity principle. You would need to prove the uniformity principle by reason alone. In order for it to be logically certain or logically justified or even reasonably justified, you would need to be able to argue the uniformity principle from a stance of reason. But you can't even do that. You can't even appeal to the uniformity principle without appealing to experience. And when you appeal back to experience, that's what gave uniformity principle its existence in the first place. So now, experience gives uniformity principle its existence, but then you're going to prove uniformity principle in existence itself? The future will always resemble the past because the future always resembles the past. You can't do that. A leprechaun exists because, a leprechaun exists. That is not justification. It's definitely not going to fly for philosophy. So, 5, therefore, conclusions based on matters of fact which rely on cause and effect cannot be rationally justified. If you're going to argue matters of fact and cause and effect, which relies on cause and effect, you are going to have to appeal to experience. You are not going to be able to appeal to reason. I remember that's what he set out to do in the beginning of part 2. That even after we've experienced the operations of cause and effect, when we try to form conclusions, even those conclusions are going to be founded on experience. And he's right. When we sit here and we try to come to conclusions about future events, we're not relying on reason alone. We can't even rely on a priori reasoning. We can't even rely on rationalism. Rationalism is always going to appeal to cause and effect. And cause and effect is only known through experience. Unless you start reasoning through relations of ideas, all bachelors are married men, Jim's a bachelor, therefore Jim's an unmarried man. 3 times 5 equals 30 divided by 2. Unless you're going to stick with relations of ideas, then you fall into the form of matters of fact. As soon as you come over to matters of fact, all of your arguments are going to presuppose cause and effect. And cause and effect is only known through experience. It is not known through any rational faculty. You will not be able to argue that heat forms a crystal. You will not be able to argue that the chill or cold of water creates ice. It is only through experience that you know this, and it is only through the chain of cause and effect that you can argue this at all. So rationality, is much weaker than anticipated. So in order to reiterate Hume's skeptical argument, all matters of fact rely on a posteriori knowledge of cause and effect. For reason to form conclusions based on cause and effect, we use induction. Obviously, we don't use deduction, we use induction. But if induction is going to be a valid form of reasoning, we must prove that the future does in fact resemble the past. But any argument that tries to prove the principle of uniformity becomes circular and illogical. And any reasoning regarding cause and effect is based on mere conjecture and custom from past experiences. Therefore, conclusions based on matter of fact, which rely on cause and effect, cannot be rationally justified. And that's Hume's conclusion, and that is the end for Hume. So post a discussion. There is a quiz this week. Next week we will move on to Searle. And as always, have a great weekend.